Well, the Bombers have added 3 new players to their list. It's been a pretty good draft haul. I think most of us will be pretty happy with the players that we've picked up. We're going to go through it all now in this video. First thing to note is that Essendon has not matched a bid for Adam Sweid. Fremantle picked him with the last pick of the first round. Essendon elected not to match that bid, so Adam Sweid won't be playing for Essendon. And look, I think we've just got to start treating academy players pretty much just like any other player. If the bid comes before you think it's worth it for you to match that bid, then it's not worth matching the bid. And if Essendon did match the bid with Adam Sweid, they would have had to go into a draft deficit next year. A draft deficit is where, say you have pick 7 next year in the draft, that might turn into pick 9 or 10 because you lose draft points. So we could have matched him. But as I narrate this, just late on a Wednesday night, we do have another pick the next night, so we'll see what happens there with Alachkar or whatever. We'll just see what happens. But the draft tonight, we picked up 3 players. We picked up Sullivan Robey, we picked up Jacob Farrow, and we picked up Dyson Sharp. And I think this is really, really exciting because Dyson Sharp was kind of expected to go at pick 5 or 6 or around that mark. He was kind of loosely linked in that first top 6. So I guess the ideal scenario for Essendon supporters looking at this draft would have been, well, what if he doesn't go in Essendon's first 2 picks and then he's not taken by Melbourne, and then all of a sudden we get to pick him with our next pick, which was pick 9, which actually became pick 13 after a trade with Carlton. And that's exactly what happened. Dyson Sharp was not picked up by Essendon with the first 2 picks. He was not picked up by Melbourne, and we were able to get him. What's interesting with the Sharp selection is that the Adelaide Crows offered its first round pick this year and next year to Essendon to try to get pick 13. But the Bombers said no, and we picked up Dyson Sharp. So there were actually 3 deals offered by the Crows for the Sharp pick, but the Dons were set on picking Dyson Sharp no matter what, so they knocked back those picks from the Crows, which is great to see. It was obviously going to be between him and Doveston, and Essendon elected to go for Dyson Sharp. So look, it's a tough thing. I've been on the Doveston train a little bit because I think he would have been good as a, as a small forward there to complement Kako, but you can't really complain about Sharp. He's a leader. He's got future captain written on him. He looks like a 200-game player. He speaks really well, and he's got a mature body as well. I think he'll be right to go from round 1 next year. So that's pretty exciting. So for those that are wondering how all this sort of took place, just after the first pick of the draft, Carlton traded their pick 9 to us. That was all to do with matching bids for their father-son, Harry Dean. And that bid came very, very early in the draft. He was actually taken at pick 3, so Carlton didn't want picks 9 and 11 essentially being chewed up on that. So we were able to get pick 9, and that's how we were able to get Dyson Sharp. So it's kind of like we've got 3 players who are rated in that top 5 or 6 in... we've actually picked 3 of them, which is absolutely fantastic. Sullivan Robey is a great get. I think a lot of us were not expecting Sullivan Robey to come to Essendon because we thought probably Richmond would take him. A lot of the pre-draft analysis had him going before us, but Richmond threw a bit of a spanner in the works, and a spanner in the works of all the people who were predicting the fandom drafts when Sam Grill was taken with one of their picks, which threw a bit of a, what you call a snowball effect onto everything else. And that ensured that we were able to pick up Sullivan Robey with our first pick. So that was really good. As soon as Grill's name got called out, I sort of yelled out and I thought, yes, because that means that Sullivan Robey is going to come to Essendon. He is an Essendon supporter. So, as is Dyson Sharp as well. So, all in all, it's a pretty good draft haul. We're just going to go through the 3 players on the list. I'm kind of got to incorporate them all into the 43 players thing I've been doing because I think it makes sense that, that obviously there's no body of work on them from former, in terms of being AFL players. We've only got their body of work as being juniors, so we can talk about them as one draft haul. And then tomorrow we'll do another video about who we pick up with our last pick in the draft. So Sullivan Robey is a unique archetype of an AFL player. He's a physically imposing forward/midfielder type player. He hits the ball hard. He's very physical. He can impact the scoreboard. And about 6 months ago, he was kind of an unknown player almost. He wasn't really on anyone's radar. And then all of a sudden, as the season went on, he just started to get bigger and bigger. He actually grew. He's actually grown from 176 centimetres to 192 centimetres. And what that's done, it means he was kind of a ground level player. So he still has those ground level skills, even though now he's got much taller. I've kind of compared him a little bit, and maybe this is not, look, it's very difficult to compare players to other players because no two players are alike. But I kind of saw some similarities to Josh Kennedy, the Sydney, not the West Coast forward, but the Sydney player, the former Hawthorn and Sydney midfielder, who kind of looks like a forward in terms of his physical size, but played really as a midfielder, like a big-bodied midfielder. Remember how big Josh Kennedy was? He was much bigger than you'd think a normal midfielder was. I kind of see some similarities with Robey there. I mean, look, no two players are alike, so you can't compare everyone exactly, but that's kind of how I see him. He played really well in the finals. He's big and he's strong and he's got a lot of attributes, which we're just going to go into now. He's got clean hands. He's physical. He's got power. He's got size. He's got mobility as well. He's capable of playing in a number of different positions. We haven't really seen him exposed as a defender or anything like that, but I think he'll be playing forward of centre mainly. There are some question marks on probably his decision making, and I guess just his exposure to the level. Like, he doesn't have a body of work like the other players do, simply because he burst onto the scene so late. Some of the other players have been good for a couple of years. He's only really burst on the scene in the last, few months. Really, no one really knew much, who he was. So that body of work, I guess, is a little bit of a risk, but it's a risk really Essendon has to take. He's just a unique physical kind of size, and he, in some ways, a bit of an ideal player, that big-bodied midfielder. One thing we're not going to be short of next year and beyond is big, tough, big-bodied midfielders. That's for sure. We're going to have them in abundance. I mean, much of his allure and his uniqueness revolves around his physical attributes. He's got his size and power, real weapons with his running capacity as well. High impact kind of player. When he moved to the midfield for the Eastern Rangers, it didn't really seem to impact him being a threat up forward. He was still able to be a threat up forward. He had 40 possessions in a final. He's able to, follow up his work and roam the ground effectively as well. And he's able to find space as well. If you look at a lot of his highlights, I mean, he's a physical player, but he's also able to get the ball into space, which I always think is an important attribute among players. I always draw that comparison with Matt Rowell, who early in his career kind of struggled that everything he was getting was contested. Now he's learnt to get a little bit of the ball on the outside. I think Robey, from what I've seen anyway, is kind of capable of doing both already. And importantly, he's an Essendon supporter as well. And I guess those things, you could argue they don't matter that much. But look, it has to be a positive, staying in Victoria, getting to play for the club that you barrack for. And it's exciting to have these big, stronger players playing for us. I always think of some of the players that Dodoro would, look, I'm not going to trash every pick he had. He had a few good ones, but I always think of these, skinny sort of halfback flanker types. A big-bodied midfielder like Robey is going to be a really, really good get. I'm very excited that he's going to be playing for the Essendon Football Club in 2026. Whether he gets to play in round one next year, hard to say, but I reckon he'll definitely be playing senior football next year to some extent. He probably won't start in the seniors, but I would imagine that it won't take long for him to get into the senior side. So the next player we picked following the Sullivan Robey pick was Jacob Farrow, the best player out of Western Australia. I guess this was a minor surprise, but not a major surprise. He was expected to go in the top 10. A lot of draft prediction, phantom drafts had him going with Melbourne just after us, but we were able to pick him up with the very next pick. And listening to him speak, I actually hadn't heard him speak before. Listening to him speak after he was picked, that probably gives you some indication why he was picked. He was probably the most impressive sounding of all the players. Look, you can't judge an 18-year-old by how they sound, but look, that was my impression of him. He seems very, very mature. I was interested to hear that he watches every game of football. He's a footy nut. And there are some players that are picked because they're just good athletes and they just happen to play good football, but they don't love the game necessarily. He sounds like he loves the game. I think that's a really, really positive attribute to have. He's actually bigger than he looks as well. When you look at him, he looks kind of skinny, but his big attribute is actually his size. He's regarded as a big-bodied kind of halfback flanker, and I would imagine that he would probably eventually move into the midfield. A lot of these players, when they're 18, they're picked based on where they've played in their junior days. But someone like that, I would imagine, a high draft pick, you would probably see him move into the midfield at some point in his career. He's able to break the game wide open with his kicking. There's comparisons that he's had to Hayden Young from Fremantle. A lot of people had Josh Lindsay as the best kick in the draft. I would agree with that. I think Josh Lindsay was the best kick in the draft. But Jacob Farrow is a very, very good kick, and he just looks like a very reliable player. Some have compared him to Jordan Dawson as well. He's pretty tall. He's got running capability. He's good at intercepting the ball as well. And I would imagine that he would eventually mould into a midfielder at some point. He'd probably play off halfback, I would imagine, at least in the beginning. If you have a look at some of his strengths, his agility, his intercept marking, his kicking, his power, his rebounding, he's big. Probably one knock on him, if anything, his endurance is probably regarded as not being, as good as some of his other attributes. But look, you work on that. You're not going to be excellent at everything. And perhaps his contested game is not necessarily at this stage like perhaps as good as like a Robey or a Sharp or anything like that. But he is a very, very reliable player, and he's one of the most sought-after players in the draft. I think the attraction with a player like this is that he will probably evolve into that midfielder like Jordan Dawson. I think that's what Matt Rose would have looked at him and probably thought, well, what's he going to be doing in 2030, 2031? I think that's kind of, where they would probably see him. He's not that tall, actually, at the moment. He's 187 centimetres, but he's going to get bigger as well. I mean, you got to remember, these kids are still growing. So this is a really exciting pickup for us. A minor surprise, but boy, if you have a chance to listen to his interview and listen to him talk, I would implore you guys to listen to him, because it really gives you some indication of how impressive sounding he is. And I love the fact that he is a footy nut and watches footy all the time. I think that can only be a good thing. So, Jacob Farrow, welcome to the Essendon Football Club. So the next player we picked up in the draft was Dyson Sharp, and I think a lot of Essendon supporters are really happy that we picked up Sharp. He's an Essendon supporter. After not picking him up with the first two picks, there was some, thought that, well, he's not going to get to us. But picking him up with pick 13, it kind of feels a bit like we got 3 top 6 picks, even though he was at pick 13, because he was regarded as a top 5 or 6 picks. Some even had him, higher than that. So to be able to get him as a slider is really, really good. He's a ready-made and consistent midfield prospect, and he's the best contested ball-winning player in the draft. And we do need that now, even though we do have some contested ball players. We have lost, of course, a few, like Setterfield, of course, and Hobbs. He is a leader as well. I look at him as being a future captain. He's a 2-time under-16 All-Australian, and he was named skipper of the under-18 version this year. He's well known amongst the recruiters. He was talked about as being a high draft prospect. I guess one of the possible knocks on him is his ceiling. If there's any knock on him at all, it's perhaps that he's a little bit one-dimensional, and that he's so good on the inside game. Does he have that outside game to really top him off as a player, or is his ceiling not as high as some of the other players? But there's no questioning his leadership or anything like that. I really do think he'll be ready to go in round 1 next year. Of the 3 players that we've got, I think he's the one that will play probably in round 1 next year. And, we do need him. I think we needed an inside mid and an outside mid. I think Farrow and Sullivan Robey kind of are a bit of both in a way, but Dyson Sharp definitely fills that inside mid need. So his strengths, he's got clean hands, he's really good in close, he's extremely competitive, probably the most competitive player in the draft, fantastic contested game, he's got leadership, strength, and he's a very, very good tackler. His kicking perhaps could improve a little bit. As I said, maybe his outside game, they can work on that. I've drawn comparisons in the past. I just talked about it earlier in this video to Matt Rowell, who had such a good inside game. He had almost no outside game. But guess what? He worked on it, and then he became a Brownlow medalist. So that's something that I'm sure Essendon will work on. They'll make sure that Sharp does work on his outside game, because if he can do that, he'll be a complete midfielder. And the reality is people talk about inside mids and outside mids. The reality is you have to be both. Even if you're an inside mid, you still need to get ball on the outside. And even if you're an outside mid, primarily, you still need to get ball on the inside. You can't be one or the other. And certainly Dyson will have to work on that. But look, it's great that he's an Essendon supporter. It's great that he is, going to play for us. And like the other two players, particularly Robey, the size of these players, they're physically imposing players for their age. These guys are only teenagers, remember? But even at that age, he looks like a leader. And I would imagine, I look at him and you think 200-game player written all over him and potentially a future captain. The midfield is really where he shines, particularly in the custom threat of stoppages. It's where he's so competitive. And I think he's just a natural leader and a natural midfielder and a natural ball winner. So he's going to be absolutely great for us next year. I can't wait to see him in the red and black. He wanted to play for Essendon. He was hoping he would get selected by us, and he has been. And it was just great to get him at pick 13. I was kind of tossing up between him and Doveston. You could make cases for both of them. That was kind of, the choice that we had when it got down to Sharp. Do you go for the almost the guaranteed 200-game midfielder who's going to be a great contested player, or do you go for the player with potentially more upside who could be that game changer in the forward line for you? We went probably with Sharp, and look, I can't complain. I think he's going to be a really, really good player. I want you guys to let me know what you think of these three picks: Sharp, Robey, and Farrow. Who do you think who are you most excited about? Who do you think will play in round 1 next year? Did you watch the draft? What are your thoughts? Are you upset about not getting Adam Sweid? Look, I'm not upset about it. I was expecting it, because all year we've been envisaging Adam Sweid playing for Essendon. But now that it's happened, I understand that, that's the bidding process. And, if a club is going to bid on him and it's not worth the bid, then you don't just pick them because they're an academy prospect. Essendon's only obligation is to pick the best players for the football club who are going to try to win us our next premiership. That is the only thing they need to consider. They're not there to be nice. They're not there to just pick a player just because they're an academy player or whatever. They're there to do a job to get the best list available. And I think the three players that we have picked so far are really, really good. I'm very excited about it, and I can't wait to see them in the red and black. So let me know what you think, guys. Like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And as always, go Bombers.